Hello, and we're back. More Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. This is part 5 that we're reading today. Hope you're enjoying it. Let's get going. And now it was 3 o'clock. The Antichrist had been on earth for 15 hours, and one angel and one demon had been drinking solidly for 3 of them. They sat opposite one another in the back room of Aziraphale's dingy old bookshop in Soho. Most bookshops in Soho have back rooms, and most of the back rooms are filled with rare, or at least very expensive, books. But Aziraphale's books didn't have illustrations. They had old brown covers and crackling pages. Occasionally, if he had no alternative, he'd sell one. And occasionally serious men in dark suits would come calling and suggest, very politely, that perhaps he'd like to sell the shop itself so that it could be turned into the kind of retail outlet more suited to the area. Sometimes they'd offer cash in large rolls of grubby 50-pound notes, or sometimes while they were talking, other men in dark glasses would wander around the shop shaking their heads and saying how inflammable paper was and what a fire trap he had here. And Aziraphale would nod and smile and say that he'd think about it. And then they'd go away, and they'd never come back. Just because you're an angel doesn't mean you have to be a fool. The table in front of the two of them was covered with bottles. "The point is," said Crowley, "the point is. He tried to focus on Aziraphale. "The point is," he said, and tried to think of a point. "The point I'm trying to make," he said, brightening, "is the dolphins. That's my point." "Kind of fish," said Aziraphale. No, said Crowley, shaking a finger. "It's a mammal. Your actual mammal. Differences." Crowley waded through the swamp of his mind and tried to remember the difference. "Difference is they—" "Mate out of water?" volunteered Aziraphale. Crowley's brow furrowed. "Don't think so. Pretty sure that's not it. Something about their young. Whatever." He pulled himself together. The point is, their brains." He reached for a bottle. "What about their brains?" said the angel. "Big brains. That's my point. Size of damn big brains. And then there's the whales. Brain City. Take it from me. Whole damn sea full of brains." "Kraken," said Aziraphale, staring moodily into his glass. Crowley gave him the long, cool look of someone who has just had a girder dropped in front of his train of thought. "Great big bugger," said Aziraphale. "Sleepeth beneath the thunders of the upper deep, under loads of huge and unnumbered bloody great seaweeds, you know. Supposed to rise to the surface right at the end when the sea boils." "Yeah?" "Fact." "There you are then," said Crowley, sitting back. "Whole sea bubbling, poor old dolphins, so much seafood gumbo, no one giving a damn. Same with gorillas. Whoops, they say, sky gone all red, stars crashing to ground. What are they putting in the bananas these days? And then—" "They make nests, you know, gorillas," said the angel, pouring another drink and managing to hit the glass on the third go. "Nah." "God's truth. Saw a film." "Nests." "That's birds," said Crowley. "Nests," insisted Aziraphale. Crowley decided not to argue the point. There you are then, he said. "All creatures great and small. Great and small. Lot of them with brains. And then bazam." "But you're part of it," said Aziraphale. "You tempt people. You're good at it." Crowley thumped his glass on the table. "That's different. They don't have to say yes. That's the ineffable bit, right? Your side made it up. You've got to keep testing people, but not to destruction." All right. I don't like it any more than you do, but I told you, I can't not do what I'm told. I'm an angel." "There's no theatres in heaven," said Crowley, "and very few films." "Don't you try to tempt me," said Aziraphale wretchedly. "I know you, you old serpent." "Just you think about it," said Crowley relentlessly. You know what eternity is? You know what eternity is? I mean, do you know what eternity is? There's this big mountain, see, a mile high at the end of the universe. And every 1,000 years there's this little bird. What little bird? Said Aziraphale suspiciously. This little bird I'm talking about. Every 1,000 years. The same bird every 1,000 years? Crowley hesitated. Yeah, he said. Bloody ancient bird, then. Okay. And every 1,000 years this bird flies, limps, flies all the way to this mountain and sharpens its beak. Hold on. You can't do that. Between here and the end of the universe there's loads of... The angel waved a hand expansively, if a little unsteadily. Loads of bugger all, dear boy. But it gets there anyway, Crowley persevered. How? It doesn't matter. It could use a spaceship, said the angel. Crowley subsided a bit. Yeah, he said, if you like. Anyway, this bird. Only it is the end of the universe we're talking about, said Aziraphale. So it'd have to be one of those spaceships where your descendants are the ones who get out at the other end. You have to tell your descendants, you say, when you get to the mountain, you've got to... He hesitated. What have they got to do? Sharpen its beak on the mountain, said Crowley, and then it flies back in the spaceship, and after 1,000 years it goes and does it all again, said Crowley quickly. There was a moment of drunken silence. Seems a lot of effort just to sharpen a beak, mused Aziraphale. Listen, said Crowley urgently. The point is that when this bird has worn the mountain down to nothing, right, then... Aziraphale opened his mouth. Crowley just knew he was going to make some point about the relative hardness of birds' beaks and granite mountains, and plunged on quickly. Then you still won't have finished watching The Sound of Music. Aziraphale froze. And you'll enjoy it, said Crowley relentlessly. You really will. My dear boy, you won't have a choice. Listen, heaven has no taste. Now, and not one single sushi restaurant. A look of pain crossed the angel's suddenly very serious face. I can't cope with this while I'm drunk, he said. I'm going to sober up. Me too. They both winced as the alcohol left their bloodstreams and sat up a bit more neatly. Aziraphale straightened his tie. I can't interfere with divine plans, he croaked. Crowley looked speculatively into his glass and then filled it again. What about diabolical ones? He said. Pardon? Well, it's got to be a diabolical plan, hasn't it? We're doing it. My side. Ah, but it's all part of the overall divine plan, said Aziraphale. Your side can't do anything without it being part of the ineffable divine plan, he added, with a trace of smugness. You wish! No, that's the... Aziraphale snapped his finger irritably. The thing. What do you call it in your colourful idiom? The line at the bottom? The bottom line. Yes, that's it. Well, if you're sure, said Crowley. No doubt about it. Crowley looked up slyly. Then you can't be certain, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't be certain that thwarting it isn't part of the divine plan too. I mean, you're supposed to thwart the wiles of evil, of the evil one at every turn, aren't you? Aziraphale hesitated. There is that, yes. You see a wile, you thwart, am I right? Broadly. Actually, I encourage humans to do the actual thwarting, because of ineffability, you understand. Right. So all you've got to do is thwart, because if I know anything, said Crowley urgently, it's that the birth is just the start. It's the upbringing that's important. It's the influences. Otherwise, the child will never learn to use its powers. He hesitated. At least, not necessarily as intended. Certainly our side won't mind me thwarting you, said Aziraphale thoughtfully. They won't mind that at all. Right, it'll be a real feather in your wing, said Crowley, and gave the angel an encouraging smile. What will happen to the child if it doesn't get a satanic upbringing, though? Said Aziraphale. Probably nothing. It'll never know. But genetics? Don't tell me from genetics. What have they got to do with it? Said Crowley. Look at Satan, created as an angel, grows up to be the great adversary. Hey, if you're going to go on about genetics, you might as well say this kid will grow up to be an angel. After all, his father was really big in heaven in the old days. Saying he'll grow up to be a demon just because his dad became one is like saying a mouse with its tail cut off will give birth to tailless mice. No, upbringing is everything. Take it from me. And without unopposed satanic influences, well, at worst, hell will have to start all over again, and the Earth gets at least another 11 years. That's got to be worth something, hasn't it? Now Aziraphale was looking thoughtful again. You're saying the child isn't evil of itself? He said slowly. Potentially evil. Potentially good, too, I suppose. Just this huge, powerful potentiality waiting to be shaped, said Crowley. He shrugged. Anyway, why are we talking about this good and evil? They're just names for sides, we know that. I suppose it's got to be worth a try, said the angel. Crowley nodded encouragingly. Agreed, said the demon, holding out his hand. The angel shook it, cautiously. It'll certainly be more interesting than saints, he said. And it'll be for the child's own good in the long run, said Crowley. We'll be godfathers, sort of, overseeing his religious upbringing, you might say. Aziraphale beamed. You know, I'd never have thought of it, he said. Godfathers. Well, I'll be damned. It's not too bad, said Crowley, when you get used to it. She was known as Scarlet. At that time, she was selling arms, although it was beginning to lose its savour. She never stuck at one job for very long, 300-400 years at the outside. You didn't want to get in a rut. Her hair was true auburn, neither ginger nor brown, but deep and burnished copper colour, and it fell to her waist in tresses that men would kill for, and indeed often had. Her eyes were a startling orange. She looked 25, and always had. She had a dusty brick-red truck full of assorted weaponry and an almost unbelievable skill at getting it across any border in the world. She had been on her way to a small West African country where a minor civil war was in progress to make a delivery which would, with any luck, turn it into a major civil war. Unfortunately, the truck had broken down far beyond even her ability to repair it, and she was very good with machinery these days. She was in the middle of a city at the time. Footnote, nominally a city. It was the size of an English country town, or translated into American terms, a shopping mall. The city in question was the capital of Kumbolaland, an African nation which had been at peace for the last 3,000 years. For about 30 years it was Sir Humphrey Clarkson land, but since the country was absolutely no mineral wealth and the strategic importance of a banana, it was accelerated towards self-government with almost unseemly haste. Kumbolaland was poor, perhaps, and undoubtedly boring, but peaceful. Its various tribes, who had gotten along with each other quite happily and long since beaten their swords into ploughshares. A fight had broken out in the city square in 1952 between a drunken ox driver and an equally drunken ox thief. People were still talking about it. Scarlet yawned in the heat. She fanned her head with her broad-brimmed hat, left the useless truck in the dusty street, and wandered into a bar. She bought a can of beer, drained it, then grinned at the barman. I got a truck needs repairing, she said. Anyone around I can talk to? The barman grinned, white and huge and expansively. He'd been impressed by the way she drank her beer. Only Nathan, miss, but Nathan has gone back to Kuanda to see his father-in-law's farm. Scarlet bought another beer. So, this Nathan. Any idea when he'll be back? Perhaps next week, perhaps 2 weeks' time, dear lady. Oh, that Nathan, he is a scamp, no? He leaned forward. You travelling alone, miss? He said. Yes. Could be dangerous. Some funny people on the roads these days. Bad men, not local boys, he added quickly. Scarlet raised her perfect eyebrow. Despite the heat, he shivered. Thanks for the warning, Scarlet purred. Her voice sounded like something that lurks in the long grass, visible only by the twitching of its ears until something young and tender wobbles by. She tipped her hat to him and strolled outside. The hot African sun beat down on her. Her truck sat in the street with a cargo of guns and ammunition and landmines. It wasn't going anywhere. Scarlet stared at the truck. A vulture was sitting on its roof. It had travelled 300 miles with Scarlet so far. It was belching quietly. She looked around the street. A couple of women chatted on a street corner. A bored market vendor sat in front of a heap of coloured gourds, fanning the flies. A few children played lazily in the dust. "What the hell?" she said quietly. "I could do with a holiday anyway." That was Wednesday. By Friday, the city was a no-go area. By the following Tuesday, the economy of the Kumbola land was shattered. 20,000 people were dead, including the barman, shot by the rebels while storming the market barricades. Almost 100,000 people were injured. All of Scarlet's assorted weapons had fulfilled the function for which they had been created, and the vulture had died of greasy degeneration. Scarlet was already on the last train out of the country. It was time to move on, she felt. She'd been doing arms for too damn long. She wanted a change. Something with openings. She quite fancied herself as a newspaper journalist. A possibility. She fanned herself with her hat and crossed her long legs in front of her. Farther down the train, a fight broke out. Scarlet grinned. People were always fighting, over her and around her. It was rather sweet, really. Sable had black hair, a trim black beard, and he had just decided to go corporate. He did drinks with his accountant. "How are we doing, Franny?" he asked her. 12 million copies sold so far. Can you believe that?" They were doing drinks in a restaurant called Top of the Sixes, on the top of 666 Fifth Avenue, New York. This was something that amused Sable ever so slightly. From the restaurant windows you could see the whole of New York. At night, the rest of New York could see the huge red 666 that adorned all four sides of the building. Of course, it was just another street number. If you started counting, you'd be bound to get to it eventually. But you had to smile. Sable and his accountant had just come from a small, expensive, and particularly exclusive restaurant in Greenwich Village, where the cuisine was entirely nouvelle: a string bean, a pea, and a sliver of chicken breast, aesthetically arranged on a square china plate. Sable had invented it the last time he'd been in Paris. His accountant had polished off her meat and 2 veg in under 50 seconds and had spent the rest of the meal staring at the plate, the cutlery, and from time to time at her fellow diners, in a manner that suggested she was wondering what they'd taste like, which was in fact the case. It had amused Sable enormously. He toyed with his Perrier. 12 million, huh? That's pretty good. That's great! So we're going corporate. It's time to blow the big one, am I right? California, I think. I want factories, restaurants, the whole schmear. We'll keep the publishing arm, but it's time to diversify, yeah? Franny nodded. Sounds good, Sable. We'll need... She was interrupted by a skeleton. A skeleton in a Dior dress with tanned skin stretched almost to snapping point over the delicate bones of the skull. The skeleton had long blonde hair and perfectly made-up lips. She looked like the person mothers around the world point to, muttering, "That's what'll happen to you if you don't eat your greens." She looked like a famine relief poster with style. She was New York's top fashion model, and she was holding a book. She said, "Excuse me, Mr. Sable. I hope you don't mind me intruding, but your book, it changed my life. I was wondering, would you mind signing it for me?" She stared imploringly at him, with eyes deep sunk in gloriously eye-shadowed sockets. Sable nodded graciously and took the book from her. It was not surprising that she had recognized him, for his dark grey eyes stared out from his photo on the foil-embossed cover. D-Plan Dieting. Slim Yourself Beautiful, the book was called. The diet book of the century. "How do you spell your name?" he asked. "Cheryl. 2 R's, 1 Y, 1 L. "You remind me of an old, old friend," he told her, as he wrote swiftly and carefully on the title page. "There you go. Glad you liked it. Always good to meet a fan." What he'd written was this: Cheryl, a measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. Revelations, verse 6, chapter 6. Dr. Raven Sable. It's from the Bible, he told her. She closed the book reverently and backed away from the table, thanking Sable. He didn't know how much this meant to her. He changed her life. Truly he did. He'd never actually earned the medical degree, he claimed, since there hadn't been any universities in those days. But Sable could see she was starving to death. He gave her a couple of months at the outside. D-plan. Handle your weight problem. Terminally. Franny was stabbing at her laptop computer hungrily, planning the next phase in Sable's transformation of the eating habits of the Western world. Sable had bought her the machine as a personal present. It was very, very expensive, very powerful, and ultra slim. He liked slim things. There's a European outfit we can buy into for the initial toehold. Holdings Incorporated. That'll give us the Liechtenstein tax base. Now, if we channel funds out through the Caymans into Luxembourg and from there to Switzerland, we could pay for the factories in... But Sable was no longer listening. He was remembering the exclusive little restaurant. It had occurred to him that he had never seen so many rich people so hungry. Sable grinned, the honest, open grin that goes with job satisfaction, perfect and pure. He was just killing time until the main event. But he was killing it in such exquisite ways. Time, and sometimes people. Okay, that's the end for today. We will read another bit as soon as possible. Okay, have a good night.